The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. About the Scarlet Letter. Published in 1850, The Scarlet Letter is considered Nathaniel Hawthorne's most famous novel and the first quintessentially American novel in style, theme, and language. Set in 17th-century Puritan Massachusetts, the novel centers around the travails of Hester Prynne, who gives birth to a daughter Pearl after an adulterous affair. Hawthorne's novel is concerned with the effects of the affair rather than the affair itself, using Hester's public shaming as a springboard to explore the lingering taboos of Puritan New England in contemporary society. The Scarlet Letter was an immediate success for a number of reasons. First and foremost, the United States was still a relatively new society, less than 100 years old at the time of the novel's publication. Indeed, still tied to Britain in its cultural formation, Hawthorne's novel offered a uniquely American style, language, set of characters, and most importantly a uniquely American central dilemma. Besides entertainment, then, Hawthorne's novel had the possibility of goading change, since it addressed a topic that was still relatively controversial, even taboo. Certainly Puritan values had eased somewhat by 1850, but not enough to make the novel completely welcome. It was to some degree a career-threatening decision to center his novel around an adulterous affair, but compare the plot of Fielding's Tom Jones. But Hawthorne was not concerned with a prurient affair here, though the novel's characters are. Hawthorne chose to leave out the details of the adulterous rendezvous between Hester and Dimmesdale entirely. Instead, he was concerned with the aftermath of the affair, the shaming of Hester, the raising of a child born of sin, and the values of a society that would allow a sin to continue to be punished long after it would seem reasonable. Hawthorne takes advantage of his greatest assets as a writer, the interiority of his writing, his exploration of thoughts and emotions, and uses them to humanize all the parties involved in the affair, as well as to demonize the thoughts that become consumed by it. Chillingworth, notably, becomes the embodiment of Puritan values, which led people to lynch and destroy in the name of God but motivated in large measure by the people's own repressed sins of lust, greed, and envy. The Scarlet Letter also became intensely popular upon publication because it had the good fortune of becoming one of America's first mass-published books. Before the Scarlet Letter, books in America usually were handmade, sold one by one in small numbers. But Hawthorne's novel benefited from a machine press, and its first run of 2,500 copies sold out immediately. As a result, then, The Scarlet Letter benefited not only from its implicit controversial subject matter but also from an unusually large available readership. Readers who agreed or disagreed with the book's choices, however subtly, could spread the word. The novel became the equivalent of a seminal political tract and the subject of endless discussion and debate, no doubt influencing social change. The novel also benefited because of Hawthorne's support and respect among New England's literary establishment. He would soon become good friends with Herman Melville. Thus, the novel became popular not only with the masses. It was heralded as appropriate reading despite its attention to adulterous love. The Scarlet Letter has been adapted many times on film, on television, and on the stage. The first film was a 1917 black-and-white silent film, while the most recent and much maligned film version opened in 1995 starring Demi Moore and Gary Oldman. Summary of the Scarlet Letter. Chapter 1, The Prison Door. A large crowd of Puritans stands outside of the prison, waiting for the door to open. The prison is described as a wooden jail, already marked with weather stains and other indications of age which gave a yet darker aspect to its beetle-browed and gloomy front. The iron on the prison is rusting and creates an overall appearance of decay. Outside the building, Next to the door, a rosebush stands in full bloom. The narrator remarks that it is possible that this rosebush had sprung up under the footsteps of the sainted Anne Hutchinson, as she entered the prison door. He then plucks one of the roses and offers it to the reader as a moral blossom to be found later in the story. Chapter 2: The Marketplace. The crowd in front of the jail is a mixture of men and women, all maintaining severe looks of disapproval. Several of the women begin to discuss Hester Prynne, and they soon vow that Hester would not have received such a light sentence for her crime if they had been the judges. One woman, the ugliest of the group, goes so far as to advocate death for Hester. Hester emerges from the prison with elegance and a ladylike air to her movements. She clutches her 3-month-old daughter, Pearl. She has sewn a large scarlet A over her breast, using her finest skill to make the badge of shame appear to be a decoration. Several of the women are outraged when they see how she has chosen to display the letter, and they want to rip it off. Hester is led through the crowd to the scaffold of the pillory. She ascends the stairs and stands, now fully revealed to the crowd, in her position of shame and punishment for the next few hours. Hawthorne compares her beauty and elegance while on the scaffold to an image of Madonna and Child, or divine maternity. The ordeal is strenuous and difficult for Hester. She tries to make the images in front of her vanish by thinking about her past. Hester was born in England and grew up there. She later met a scholar who was slightly deformed, having a left shoulder higher than his right. Her husband, later revealed to be Roger Chillingworth, first took her to Amsterdam and then sent her to America to await his arrival. Hester looks out over the crowd and realizes for the first time that her life condemns her to be alone. She looks at her daughter and then fingers the scarlet letter that will remain a part of her from now on. At the thought of her future, she squeezes her daughter so hard that the child cries out in pain. Chapter 3: The Recognition. On the edge of the crowd, Hester notices an Indian accompanied by a white man. She recognizes the white man as Roger Chillingworth, her husband, who sent her to America and remained in Amsterdam. Hester fearfully clutches Pearl harder, which again causes her child to cry out in pain. Roger Chillingworth asks a bystander who Hester is and what her crime was. The man informs him of her past, telling that she was sent to Boston to await her husband, but she ended up with a child instead. Chillingworth remarks that the man who was her partner in the crime of adultery will eventually become known. The Reverend Mr. Dimsdale is exhorted to make Hester tell the gathered crowd who the father is. She refuses and instead tells him that she will bear both his shame and her own. Dimsdale cries out, "She will not speak," and places his hand over his heart. The Reverend Mr. Wilson steps forward and delivers a sermon against sin, after which Hester is allowed to return to the prison. Chapter 4: The Interview. After Hester returns to her prison cell, she remains agitated by the day's events. Pearl is also upset and starts crying. The jailer therefore allows a physician to enter and try to calm them down. Roger Chillingworth, pretending to be a physician, enters and mixes a potion for Pearl, who soon falls asleep. He also makes a drink for Hester, who is afraid that he is trying to kill her. Nevertheless, she drinks his potion and sits down on the bed. Chillingworth tells her that he forgives her, and he accepts the blame for having married her. She says, "Thou knowest that I was frank with thee. I felt no love, nor feigned any." He asks Hester who the father of Pearl is, but she refuses to tell him. Chillingworth then laughs and says, "He bears no letter of infamy wrought into his garment, as thou dost, but I shall read it on his heart." He then makes Hester swear to never reveal that he is her husband. She becomes afraid of Chillingworth's purpose, and she asks whether he has forced her into a bond that will ruin her soul. He smiles and tells her, "Not thy soul, no, not thine." Chapter 5, Hester at her needle. Hester is released from prison and finds a cottage in the woods near the outskirts of the city, where she begins to set up her new life. She does not avail herself of the opportunity to escape to a new life without shame in some other city. The narrator remarks that people often are drawn irresistibly to live near the place where a great and marked event has occurred. He further comments that even if that is not the reason, Hester may have been inclined to remain in Boston because her secret lover still lived there. Hester's skill at needlework, earlier shown in the fine way that she displayed the Scarlet Letter, allows her to maintain a fairly stable lifestyle. Still, her reputation as an outcast and loner causes a negative aura to be cast around her. Thus young children often creep up to her house to spy on her while she worked. In spite of her excellent needlework, she is never called upon to make a bridal gown due to her reputation. Hester spends time working on projects which bring income, and she devotes the remainder of her working time to creating garments for the poor. She lives simply, with the sole exception being that she creates amazing dresses of fine fabrics for Pearl. Hester's social life is virtually eliminated as a result of her shameful history. She is treated so poorly that often preachers will stop in the street and start to deliver a lecture as she walks by. Hester also begins to hate children, who unconsciously realize there is something different about her and thus start to follow her with shrill cries through the city streets. One of the things which Hester starts to notice is that every once in a while she receives a sympathetic glance and feels like she has a companion in her sin. As the narrator puts it, it gave her a sympathetic knowledge of the hidden sin in other hearts. This point is interesting in that many of the people now accused of hypocrisy regarding the Scarlet Letter include those such as a venerable minister or magistrate, people who are viewed as models of piety and justice but still carry secret sins. Chapter 6, Pearl. Hester chose the name Pearl to represent something of great value, namely, the cost of her virtue and place in society. See Matthew 13:46, where the pearl costs everything a person has, but it is worth the great price. Hester is afraid that nothing good can come from her sin, however, and thus she fears that Pearl will in some way be retribution for her sinful passion. Hester spends hours clothing Pearl in the richest garments she can find, even though it seems that Pearl would appear just as beautiful in any garment. Hester's passion exists in the child's demeanor in the form of flightiness of temper, and even some of the very cloud shapes of gloom and despondency that had brooded in her heart. Pearl turns out to be unmanageable as a child, forcing Hester to let her do what she wants. Pearl has a particular mood where nothing Hester does can persuade the child to change her stance. So eventually Hester is ultimately compelled to stand aside, and permit the child to be swayed by her own impulses. Pearl is compared to a witch in both the way she interacts with other children and the way she plays. Having been scorned by the other Puritan families all her young life, Pearl is positively wrathful when other children approach her, going so far as to throw stones and scream at them. With toys, Pearl always plays games in which she destroys everything. The first thing Pearl saw in her infancy was the Scarlet Letter. As a baby she even reached up and touched the letter, causing her mother intense agony at the shame it generated in her. Pearl later played a game where she threw flowers at her mother and jumped around in glee every time she hit the Scarlet Letter. At one point Hester asks Pearl, "Child, what art thou?" To which Pearl replies that she is Hester's little Pearl. Pearl eventually asks who sent her to Hester, to which Hester replies that the Heavenly Father sent her. Pearl responds with, "He did not send me, I have no Heavenly Father." Pearl then presses Hester to tell her who her father is, saying, "Tell me. Tell me. It is thou who must tell me." Hester is unable to answer her question and remains silent, thinking about the fact that some Puritans think Pearl is the child of a demon. Chapter 7, The Governor's Hall. Hester takes Pearl with her to the governor's hall in order to deliver some gloves she has sewn. Hester's main reason for going is to plead with Governor Bellingham to let her keep Pearl, whom the governor thinks would be better raised in a more Christian household. Hester has decorated Pearl in a crimson velvet tunic embroidered with gold thread. The narrator comments that the child's whole appearance was the Scarlet Letter in another form, the Scarlet Letter endowed with life. When the children in the town try to throw mud at her, Pearl chases them away and appears to resemble the scarlet fever in her wrath. Hester arrives at the governor's mansion and enters. The mansion contains pictures of the Bellingham ancestors and a new suit of armor for the governor himself. Pearl plays games by looking into the armor and then goes to look at the garden, from which she demands a red rose. When the governor approaches, Pearl excitedly falls silent. Chapter 8, The Elf Child and the Minister. Governor Bellingham, accompanied by the Reverend John Wilson, Arthur Dimmesdale, and Roger Chillingworth, enters the hall of his mansion. He first sees Pearl, dressed lavishly in her scarlet outfit, standing in front of him. Pearl introduces herself and tells them her name, at which point Wilson states, Ruby, rather, or Red Rose, at the very least, judging from thy hue. The men then see Hester Prynne in the background. Governor Bellingham tells her that he thinks it would be better for the child if Pearl were removed from her mother's care. Hester responds that she can teach the child what she has learned from the Scarlet Letter, at which point Bellingham sternly indicates that the letter is precisely the reason they want to remove Pearl from her care. As a test of Pearl's education, Wilson is asked to examine Pearl. He asks her who her maker is, to which Pearl replies that she was plucked off the rosebush that grows by the prison door. The governor is so shocked by her reply that he is immediately prepared to take Pearl away from Hester. Hester grabs Pearl and screams that she will die before the men are allowed to take away her daughter. Finally, in desperation, she turns to Arthur Dimmesdale and pleads with him to speak on her behalf. He comes forward with his hand over his heart and argues that God has obviously given Pearl to Hester for some divine reason, and that it would meddle with the ways of the Lord to take Pearl away from her. He then indicates that Pearl is punishment for Hester as well, evidenced by the garb of the poor child, so forcibly reminding us of that red symbol which sears Hester's bosom. Bellingham agrees with Dimmesdale's arguments and decides to let matters stand as they currently are. Pearl then goes to Dimmesdale and presses her cheek against his hand, showing a tenderness which is unusual for her demeanor. Hester takes her and leaves. As Hester is walking home, the sister of Governor Bellingham, Mistress Hibbins, opens her window and calls out. Mistress Hibbins is apparently a witch who steals into the forest late at night to play with a black man. She asks Hester to accompany her, but Hester replies that she has to get Pearl home. She then adds that had they taken Pearl away from her, she would have been willing to go into the woods that night. Hibbins says, "We shall have thee there anon,"